The knock came at 7:14 on a Tuesday evening, and Gareth Owusu almost didn't answer it. He was in the kitchen, still in his work clothes, a smear of sawdust on his left forearm, a cup of reheated coffee going cold on the counter, and his daughter was doing her homework at the kitchen table the way she always did, with her pencil tucked behind one ear and her tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth in concentration. The knock was quiet, almost hesitant, not the knock of someone who expected to be welcomed. "I'll get it," he said, mostly to himself. He crossed through the living room, past the crooked family photo that he kept meaning to straighten and never did, and opened the front door. The woman on his porch was not what he expected. But then he hadn't been expecting anyone. She was around his age, early 40s maybe, and she was wearing a dark wool coat that probably cost more than Gareth made in a week. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She was holding a manila envelope in both hands, pressed flat against her stomach like something she was trying to keep warm. Or maybe like something she was afraid she might drop. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. The porch light caught the edges of her face, sharp jaw, some unnamable expression that was not quite relief and not quite grief. "Gareth Owusu," she said. His name in her mouth was strange, careful, like she'd been practicing it. "That's me," said. She exhaled, just slightly. "My name is Sylvienne Beauchamp-Larose," she said. "I don't know if you remember me." He looked at her for a long moment. He didn't move. Behind him, his daughter called out from the kitchen, "Dad, what does inevitable mean?" And Gareth called back, "It means it was always going to happen," without taking his eyes off the woman at his door. He remembered her. He remembered her very well. 12 years is a long time to not see a person. Long enough that faces blur and voices go fuzzy at the edges. Long enough that you can almost convince yourself that certain chapters of your life belong to someone else. Gareth had done a reasonable job of convincing himself of exactly that. He had a daughter to raise and a business to run and a mortgage to pay and neighbors who waved to him over the fence on Saturday mornings, and he had learned, the hard way slowly, with great effort, to keep his eyes pointed forward. But memory doesn't ask permission, and standing in that doorway looking at Sylvienne Beauchamp-Larose in her expensive wool coat, holding whatever was in that envelope, Gareth felt 12 years collapse into nothing. She had been 29 when he met her. He'd been 31. She was already climbing then. Sharp and deliberate, the kind of woman who walked into a room and quietly recalibrated everyone's expectations. He was a journeyman carpenter working a commercial contract in downtown Montreal, steady hands and a good reputation, nothing more. They had met at a party neither of them particularly wanted to be at, and they had talked until the host turned the lights up and people started finding their coats. And when they left, they walked for 3 blocks in the cold before realizing they'd been heading in the same direction just to keep talking. 3 months of something quiet and real. Dinners in her apartment, weekends up in Tremblant, Sunday mornings reading in separate chairs and not feeling the need to fill the silence. Her laughing at something he said with her whole face, not just her mouth. Him showing her how to sandswood along the grain. Small things. The kind of small things that turn into a life if you let them. He had wanted to let them, and then one evening she sat across from him at a table in a restaurant they both liked, and told him she thought they should end it. She said it quietly, and she said it without cruelty, and she looked him in the eye the whole time. She said it wasn't working. She said she needed to focus on some things. She said she was sorry. He had been too stunned to ask the right questions. He had nodded and paid the bill and walked home in February and stood in his apartment for a long time with his coat still on. He never heard from her again. Not directly. 6 months later, he heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd gotten engaged to someone in her father's circle, a developer, or a banker, something like that. Gareth had spent one very bad week thinking about that, and then he had gotten up and gotten on with things because what else was there to do? He met someone else eventually, got married, had his daughter, Imara, who was now 9 years old and still shouting vocabulary questions from the kitchen. The marriage lasted 6 years before it didn't, and then it was just the two of them. Gareth and Imara, in a house in Gatineau with a porch that needed repainting and a maple tree in the backyard that Imara had declared her favorite thing in the world. It was a good life. He wasn't being ironic when he thought that. It was genuinely a good life, built out of things he chose and things that happened to him and things he'd had to make the best of, and he'd made the best of them. And now Sylvienne Beauchamp-Larose was on his porch with an envelope, and he had told his daughter what inevitable means. "You'd better come in," he said. She sat at his kitchen table, across from where Amara had just been, the homework still spread out, pencil resting on the page. Imara herself had been sent to her room with a glass of juice and a quiet, "This is grown-up stuff, sweetheart," and she had gone without too much protest, though Gareth knew she'd be listening from the top of the stairs. He put the kettle on. He didn't know what else to do with his hands. Sylvian sat very straight. She set the envelope on the table in front of her but didn't open it. She looked at the kitchen, the drawings on the fridge, Amara's boots by the back doors, the small dents in the wooden door frame where Gareth had been marking his daughter's height every birthday. "You have a daughter," she said. "Amara. She's 9. Sylvian nodded slowly. "She looks like you. I know." He didn't offer anything else. He was waiting. She pressed her fingers flat against the envelope. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "I know that. I know it's 12 years too late. I'm not here expecting anything from you. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to make things complicated for your life. What are you here for?" She looked down at the envelope, then back up at him. "My father is dying," she said. Gareth said nothing. "Pancreatic cancer. He's got maybe a few weeks." She said it the way people say very hard things when they've been practicing the words long enough that the words no longer sound real. "He asked me to come to you. He has some things he wants to." She stopped, steadied herself. "He needs to say some things. About why I ended things. About what actually happened." The kettle clicked. Gareth didn't move. "What actually happened?" he repeated. She picked up the envelope and held it out to him. He looked at it for a moment before he took it. Inside there were letters. A small stack of them, held together with a rubber band. He recognized the handwriting on the top one. He recognized it because he had written it. It was a letter addressed to Sylvian in his own hand, dated February 12 years ago. It had never been sent, or so he'd believed. He sat down. "He intercepted them," Sylvian said, and her voice was very steady in the way that voices get when the emotion underneath them is very large. "After we'd been together for about 2 months, he hired someone to go through my mail. I didn't know that. I had no idea. There were 4 letters you sent me and 3 that I sent you, and he had them all." Gareth looked at the letters in his hands. He thought about February. He thought about walking home in the cold with his coat already on. "Why?" he said, and it came out very flat, not quite a question. "Because you weren't what he had planned for me." She said it without flinching, which he respected even now. He had someone in mind, someone from a family he'd been doing business with for 15 years. He was worried that if things got serious between us, her jaw tightened. "He said he was protecting me by stealing our letters, by stealing our letters." Gareth put the envelope down on the table. He looked at the drawings on his refrigerator. One of them was a purple dog that Amara had done last spring and declared was her masterpiece. He thought about how much he loved his kid. He thought about what it would feel like to discover that your father had taken something from you without asking. "I found them 3 weeks ago," Sylvian said. "He was too weak to hide them anymore. He had a box. I don't know why he kept them. Maybe he needed someone to eventually know." She looked at her hands. "I spent about a week being so angry I couldn't think straight, and then I thought I need to find him. I need to find Gareth. Because whatever he did, and I'm still furious, whatever else is true, you were owed an explanation 12 years ago and you never got one." She looked at him. "So here I am," she said. 12 years too late, sitting in your kitchen." From upstairs came a small, careful sound. Gareth glanced toward the hallway. Imara, listening from the 3rd step. He had always been able to tell exactly which step she was sitting on based on which board creaked. "Imara," he called. "You can come down." A pause. Then small footsteps on the stairs. If you are expecting the next part of this story to be simple, it wasn't. Real things rarely are. Imara came down the stairs in her socks, her favorite pair, the ones with small foxes on them, and she stopped at the edge of the kitchen and looked at Sylvian with the direct, uncomplicated gaze that 9-year-olds are still allowed to have. "Hi," she said. "Hi," said Sylvian. "Are you a friend of my dad's?" He didn't help her. He wanted to see what she'd do. "We knew each other a long time ago," Sylvian said carefully. "Before you were born." Amara considered this. "Were you friends?" "We were," she said. And then, after a moment, "We were more than friends, actually." It was the honest answer. Gareth gave her that. Imara thought about this for 3 seconds and then asked if she could have a second glass of juice. And Gareth said yes, and the strange, terrible weight in the kitchen shifted just slightly into something almost manageable. They talked for 2 hours that first evening. Not about the letters specifically, not about the years in between. There would be time for that, or there wouldn't, they didn't know yet, but about other things. Imara showed Sylvian the purple dog drawing and explained at length why it was a good dog even though it was purple. Gareth told Sylvian about his business, the small carpentry company he'd built up over the last several years, Mostly residential now, custom cabinetry and renovation work. Sylvienne told him, without making too much of it, that she ran a mid-sized architectural firm in Ottawa. She'd moved there 4 years ago from Montreal. She was not married, she had never had children. She said this last part quietly and didn't look at him when she said it. When Amara finally went to bed, properly this time, upstairs under her quilt, Gareth poured 2 glasses of water and brought them to the table and sat down across from Sylvienne again. "The man your father wanted you with," he said. "What happened? We were engaged for 2 years. She turned the water glass slowly between her palms. And he was a perfectly decent man. He is a perfectly decent man, I assume. We don't speak. We called it off about 6 years in. He said I was never fully present. He was right." She paused. "I told myself for years that I just wasn't the kind of person who was good at relationships. That some people were wired that way, and I was one of them. And now? And now I've found 7 letters in a box Father's study, and I think maybe the problem wasn't that I was bad at relationships." She said it without self-pity, which was worse than if she'd been self-pitying. "I think maybe the problem was that my father made a decision that wasn't his to make, and I've been living in the wreckage of it without even knowing it was wreckage." Gareth looked at her. He thought about the version of himself who had written those letters. Young or younger anyway, not naive exactly, but believing that if something felt true, it had a reasonable chance of going somewhere. He thought about how long it had taken him to stop waiting for a phone call or a letter or any kind of explanation at all. "I'm angry," he said. "I want you to know that. I don't want to be polite about it. I know, not at you, or not only at you, mostly at him." He ran a hand across the top of his head, "but also at the time. At 12 years of not knowing what happened, you don't get to give that back." "No," she said, "you don't." The house was very quiet. Upstairs, Amara slept or was in the process of sleeping. Gareth could hear the particular silence of a child almost, but not quite asleep. Outside, it had started to rain, a light October rain on the maple leaves. "Why did you actually come?" he said. "And I don't mean the letters. I mean, your father asked you to come. You could have said no." Sylvienne looked at the water glass, then at the drawings on the fridge. "Because I wanted to know if you were okay," she said simply. "After everything, I wanted to know that you'd built something. That what my father did hadn't." She stopped. Started again. "I needed to see that you were okay." Gareth thought about this for a long time. "I'm okay," he said. "I can see that." He nodded slowly. "But I have some questions. Not tonight. But there are things I need to understand, I know. I'll answer anything you ask. Your father. He wants to see me?" She met his eyes. "He does. You don't have to go. I want to be very clear that I'm not here to pressure you into anything, but yes. He asked me to ask you." Gareth said nothing. "Take your time," she said, and he did. He took 3 days. He thought about it while cutting cabinet joints in the workshop. He thought about it during Amara's school pickup, watching her tear across the schoolyard with a backpack twice the size of her torso. He thought about it in the evenings when the house was quiet. His business partner, a Ghanaian-Canadian man named Kwaku, who had known Gareth for 15 years and had an opinion about everything, listened to the whole story over lunch on the second day and was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to happen?" Kwaku said. "I don't know. Yes, you do." Gareth tore a piece of bread. "I want it to not have happened. That's what I want." "Sure, but after that." He thought about Sylvienne sitting at his kitchen table, turning a glass of water in her hands, saying, "I wanted to know if you were okay." He thought about the letters. "I want to understand," he said finally. "I spent 12 years not understanding. I'd like to understand." "Then go," said Kwaku. He went on a Thursday alone. Sylvienne had offered to go with him, and he'd said no. This felt like something that needed to be done without an audience, even a sympathetic one. The house was in Westmount, large and old the way old Montreal money makes things large and old, with a wide front staircase and the particular smell of a house where someone is dying, flowers in vases and something medicinal underneath. A woman in scrubs let him in and led him upstairs to a room where the curtains were drawn against the afternoon light. Augustin Beauchamp-Larose was smaller than Gareth had expected. He had seen a photo of him once, years ago, a tall, commanding man at some industry event, the kind of face that appeared in the business section of newspapers. The man in the bed was not that man. He was thin in the way illness makes people thin, as if the body is slowly retracting itself. His eyes were still sharp, though. Gareth did not sit down. He stood at the end of the bed and he waited. "Mr. Owusu," said Augustin. His voice was still authoritative even now. Old habits. "Mr. Beauchamp-Larose." A silence. The rain was against the windows here, too. "I owe you an explanation," the older man said. "Your daughter already told me. What she told you was the facts. I want to explain thee. He paused, breathed slowly. The reasoning. Though I understand if you'd prefer not to hear it. Gareth looked at him. I'll hear it. What followed was not an excuse. To the man's credit, and Gareth gave him that credit reluctantly, it was not an excuse, it was an accounting. Augustin Beauchamp-Larose had made a calculation 12 years ago. Sylvienne's future, as he understood it, lay in a particular direction. Gareth did not fit that direction. He had made a decision on her behalf because he believed he understood what was best for her, and he had done it in the way that men who have always had power do things, cleanly, quietly, without asking. I was wrong, he said. I've spent 3 years knowing I was wrong, and I couldn't. His jaw moved. I couldn't bring myself to say it to her while I still believed I could justify it. No, Gareth said. You can't. She is angry with me. She should be. Yes, a pause. She is still my daughter. I know that, Gareth said. And he did know that. He thought about what it would be like if Amara came to him one day 20 years from now and told him that something he'd done, with the best intentions, with all the love in the world, had cost her something she couldn't get back. He didn't want to think about it too hard. I can't give you the time back, Augustin said. I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking. He closed his eyes for a moment. I'm asking if you might be willing to not carry this as something that was done to you. If you might be able to understand it as something that was done by a very foolish man who thought he knew more than he did. Gareth stood at the end of the bed for a long moment. I'll think about it, he said. It was the honest answer. He left after that. He drove back to Gatineau in the fading October light, and when he pulled into the driveway, Amara was in the backyard in her coat, raking leaves into a pile and then jumping into it, which somewhat defeated the purpose of the raking but was clearly the actual goal all along. He sat in the truck for a moment watching her. Then he went inside and called Sylvienne. They did not get back together. Not immediately. Not in the way of stories that want to tie themselves up neatly in 90 minutes. What they did instead was this. Gareth agreed to have coffee. One coffee, a Saturday morning in a place halfway between Gatineau and Ottawa, a quiet spot near the market where they could hear each other talk. Sylvienne came without the coat this time, in something more ordinary, and they sat across from each other and talked for 3 hours without discussing her father or the letters or what had been lost. They talked about their lives, their actual lives, the texture of them, the embarrassing parts, the good parts, the ways they'd surprised themselves by becoming who they'd become. And then they agreed to have coffee again. Imara knew something was happening. She was 9, not uninformed. One evening when Gareth was washing dishes, she leaned against the counter next to him and said very seriously, Is Sylvienne your friend now? I think so, Gareth said. A real friend? He thought about it. The kind where you knew them before and then you're figuring out if you know them still. Imara processed this, like how I have to remember who Chloe is every September because she changes over the summer. A little like that, he said. She nodded sagely and went back to her homework. What Augustin Beauchamp-Larose had not counted on, what men who arrange other people's lives from a distance rarely count on, was that the people whose lives they arrange have a way of continuing regardless. Gareth had continued. He had built something out of what was left. A business, a daughter, a small house in Gatineau with a maple tree and a porch that still needed repainting. He had made a life that was his, and it was a full one. He wasn't waiting to be rescued from it. He wasn't waiting for anything. But there is a difference between a full life and a complete one. Gareth had known that for a long time. He had just gotten good at not looking directly at it. 6 months after Sylvienne appeared on his porch with that envelope, she came to Amara's 10th birthday party. It was not a large party, 5 kids, a homemade cake, a disaster with streamers that was nobody's fault specifically. Sylvienne stood in the kitchen with Gareth, cutting the cake into uneven slices, and Amara kept running in to report on the status of the streamers. At one point, she leaned up between them both and said, You two should just be friends for real. We are friends for real, Gareth said. No, Amara said with great patience, I mean friends. And then she ran back to her guests. Gareth looked at Sylvienne. Sylvienne looked at the cake. She's something, Sylvienne said. Yeah, he said. She really is. Augustin Beauchamp-Larose died on a cold Wednesday in November, 2 weeks before Christmas. Sylvienne was with him. She called Gareth from the hospital, and he drove to Ottawa without thinking much about it. And he sat with her in the waiting room, while she finished the paperwork and all the small, terrible administrative tasks that surround the ending of a life. And when they finally walked outside into the parking lot and the cold hit them both, she stood very still for a moment. Then she said, He told me, near the end. He said he hoped you'd both be okay, that he hoped you would. She stopped. He said, J'espère qu'ils trouveront le chemin. I hope they find the way. Gareth was quiet. As last words go, he said finally, that's not the worst. She almost laughed. It was the realest sound he'd heard from her in a long time. He drove her home that night. She fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere past Aylmer, and he drove quietly through the dark and let her sleep, and thought about the 12 years, and the letters in the box, and the foolish man in the bed who thought he knew what was best for everyone, and the things you can and can't repair, and his daughter at home with a neighbor watching her who was probably letting her stay up too late. He thought about all of it the way you think about something when you finally decided to look at it straight on instead of sideways. When he pulled up outside her building, she woke up slowly, blinking and looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for all of it." He nodded. She got out of the car. Then she leaned back in through the open door. "Coffee next week?" "Coffee next week," he said. She closed the door. He watched her go inside. He sat in the parked car for a moment in the orange glow of the streetlights, and he thought, okay, just that. Just okay. Then he drove home to his daughter.